In the misty mountains of Japan, hidden within ancient temples, lie some of the most extraordinary and disturbing religious artifacts in human history. These are not ordinary mummies, preserved by skilled embalmers after death. No, these are the remains of Buddhist monks who chose to mummify themselves while still alive. Welcome to an exploration of one of humanity's most extreme spiritual practices. A journey into the minds and bodies of monks who believed that ultimate enlightenment required the ultimate sacrifice. This is the story of self-mummification, or as it's known in Japanese, Sokushin Butsu. To understand why any human being would choose such a path, we must first journey back to the origins of this practice. Rooted in the Shugendo tradition of Japanese Buddhism, Shugendo, meaning the way of training and testing, emerged in the 7th century as a synthesis of Buddhism, Shintoism, and Taoism. Its practitioners, known as Yamabushi, were mountain ascetics who sought spiritual power through extreme physical and mental trials. These mountain monks believed that the body was merely a vessel, a temporary shell housing the eternal soul. To them, physical suffering was not something to be avoided, but embraced as a pathway to divine understanding. The practice of self-mummification was considered the highest form of spiritual achievement, a demonstration of complete mastery over physical desires and earthly attachments. It was believed that a monk who successfully completed this process would not truly die, but would enter a state of suspended meditation, awaiting the arrival of Maitreya Buddha, the Buddha of the future. The most famous practitioner of this art was Kukai, also known as Kobo Daishi, the founder of Shingon Buddhism in Japan. Though Kukai himself did not practice self-mummification, his teachings on the unity of body and spirit and the possibility of achieving enlightenment in one's physical lifetime provided the theological foundation for this extreme practice. But how does one prepare for such an undertaking? How does a human being systematically destroy their own body while maintaining the mental clarity necessary for spiritual enlightenment? The process of self-mummification was not a sudden decision, nor a quick death. It was a carefully orchestrated, methodical journey that took approximately 10 years to complete. The first phase, lasting 1,000 days, was called the 1,000-day preparation. During this period, the monk would begin to drastically alter his diet and lifestyle. All grains, rice, wheat, barley, and millet, were eliminated from the diet. These foods, rich in carbohydrates and fats, were believed to promote the growth of bacteria and decay after death. Instead, the monk would subsist on a diet of nuts, seeds, berries, and tree bark. Pine needles became a staple, along with various roots and herbs found in the mountains. This wasn't simply a matter of changing what they ate, but gradually reducing the total amount of food consumed. The monk would slowly, deliberately, begin to starve himself. Physical training also intensified during this phase. The monk would engage in grueling meditation sessions, often lasting for days without rest. He would expose himself to extreme temperatures, sitting naked in snow during winter, or under the blazing sun during summer. The body fat, so necessary for normal human survival, would begin to disappear. The monk's appearance would become gaunt, skeletal, a living preview of the mummy he intended to become. But this was only the beginning. The second phase, another 1,000 days, pushed the boundaries of human endurance even further. The already limited diet would be reduced to an even more extreme level. Now, only bark and roots would be consumed, and only in tiny quantities. Water intake would also be severely restricted. The monk's body would begin to consume its own muscle tissue for energy, a process called catabolysis. During this phase, the The monk would also begin consuming a special tea brewed from the sap of the urushi tree. This is the same tree used to make Japanese lacquer, and its sap is highly toxic to humans. The urushi tea served a dual purpose. First, it acted as a preservative, slowly poisoning the monk's system, but also creating conditions within the body that would inhibit bacterial growth after death. Second, and perhaps more importantly for the monk's mental state, the tea caused severe vomiting and diarrhea. This further accelerated the dehydration process, while also serving as a form of purification, ridding the body of what the monk considered impurities. By the end of this second phase, the monk would be barely recognizable as human. His skin would be stretched tight over prominent bones. His eyes would be sunken deep into his skull. He would move slowly, deliberately, conserving every precious calorie. And yet, he was still alive, still conscious, still choosing, day by day, to continue this horrific process. The third and final phase was the most harrowing of all. The monk, now barely clinging to life, would enter a small stone chamber barely large enough to accommodate a seated human. This chamber, called a meditation box, was typically built into the side of a mountain or beneath the floor of a temple. It was designed with a small air tube, allowing just enough oxygen to keep the monk alive, but not enough to make the experience comfortable. The monk would be sealed inside, sitting in the lotus position, with a small bell in his hands. Each day, as long as he remained conscious, he would ring this bell, letting the outside world know that he was still alive, still meditating. Inside this tomb, the monk would continue his meditation practice. He would recite mantras, focus on his breathing, and prepare his spirit for the final transition. But what was happening to his body during this time was truly horrific. With no food or water, the monk's organs would begin to shut down one by one. His kidneys would fail first, followed by his liver. His heart would struggle to pump blood through increasingly constricted vessels. The dehydration would be excruciating. His mouth would become so dry that his tongue would stick to the roof of his mouth. His skin would become paper thin, stretched taut over his skeleton. And yet, according to historical accounts, many monks remained conscious and alert, continuing to ring their bell for weeks, sometimes even months. The conditions inside the chamber were perfect for preservation. The cool, dry mountain air, combined with the monk's extremely low body fat and the toxic urushi tree compounds in his system, created an environment hostile to the bacteria that normally cause decay. After 3 years of waiting, the chamber would finally be opened. This was the moment of ultimate truth, the test that would determine whether the monk had achieved spiritual immortality or had simply died in vain. The criteria for success were strict and unforgiving. The body must be perfectly preserved, showing no signs of decay or corruption. The skin should be intact, the hair still attached to the scalp, the fingernails still present. But most importantly, the monk must still be seated in perfect meditation posture. His spine must be straight, his hands properly positioned, his face serene and peaceful. If these conditions were met, the monk was declared to have achieved Soku Shimbutsu, becoming a Buddha in this very body. He would be dressed in elaborate robes, placed in a position of honor within the temple, and venerated as a living Buddha. But if the body showed any signs of decay, if the posture had collapsed, or if there were any indications of a normal death and decomposition, the attempt was considered a failure. The remains would be given a traditional Buddhist funeral, and the monk would be remembered as a devoted practitioner, but not as a successfully self-mummified Buddha. The success rate was devastatingly low. Of the hundreds of monks who attempted this practice, only about 24 are officially recognized as having achieved true self-mummification. One of the most famous successful cases is Shin-yokai Shonin, who completed his self-mummification in 1783. When his chamber was opened, his body was found in perfect condition, still seated in meditation posture, with a serene expression on his face. Today, his mummified remains can be seen at Dai-Nichibo Temple in Yamagata Prefecture, where thousands of visitors come each year to witness this testament to human spiritual determination. What drives a human being to such extremes? How does someone reach a mental state where slow, deliberate self-destruction becomes not only acceptable, but desirable? To understand this mindset, we must delve into the Buddhist concept of dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately understood as dissatisfaction or unease. According to Buddhist teaching, all existence is characterized by dukkha. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Even our happiest moments are tinged with the knowledge that they will end. The only escape from this cycle of suffering is to achieve nirvana, a state of perfect peace and understanding, where the illusion of individual existence is finally overcome. For most Buddhists, this process takes many lifetimes. Through accumulated good karma, meditation practice, and ethical living, one gradually progresses toward enlightenment. But the monks who chose self-mummification were not content to wait. They believed that through the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, through the complete transcendence of bodily needs and desires, they could achieve enlightenment immediately. This wasn't seen as suicide, which Buddhism generally prohibits. Rather, it was viewed as the ultimate meditation practice, a method of using the dying process itself as a vehicle for spiritual awakening. The psychological preparation for such an undertaking was as important as the physical preparation. The monk had to genuinely believe, with absolute conviction, that what he was doing was not only worthwhile, but necessary for the salvation of all beings. Many of these monks spent years studying the experiences of their predecessors. They would read detailed accounts left by previous practitioners, describing every stage of the process. They would meditate on death, visualizing their own decomposition, training their minds to accept what was coming. Some historical accounts describe monks who could enter trance-like states, where they would experience what they believed to be previews of death. They would slow their breathing to barely perceptible levels, reduce their heart rate dramatically, and remain in these states for days at a time. This wasn't just psychological conditioning, but also practical training. By learning to control their autonomic nervous system, these monks could extend their survival time during the final phase, maintaining consciousness longer and theoretically increasing their chances of successful preservation. From a modern scientific perspective, the process of self-mummification is both fascinating and horrifying. It represents perhaps the most extreme example of deliberate body modification in human history. The human body, under normal circumstances, is remarkably resilient. It can survive weeks without food and several days without water. But the monks who practiced self-mummification pushed far beyond these normal limits. The gradual reduction in caloric intake over several years allowed their bodies to adapt slowly to starvation conditions. Their metabolisms would slow dramatically. Their hearts would beat more slowly. Their breathing would become shallow and infrequent. This process, known medically as adaptive thermogenesis, is the body's attempt to conserve energy during periods of scarcity. However, it can only slow down the inevitable for so long. The consumption of urushi tree sap was perhaps the most ingenious aspect of the entire process. Modern chemical analysis has revealed that urushiol, the active compound in urushi sap, acts as a powerful preservative. Urushiol causes severe allergic reactions in most people, but when consumed regularly in small doses over months or years, it gradually saturates the body's tissues. This creates an environment hostile to the bacteria responsible for post-mortem decomposition. Essentially, the monk was pickling himself from the inside, while still alive. The extreme dehydration achieved during the process also played a crucial role in preservation. Bacteria require water to survive and reproduce. By reducing their body's water content to minimal levels, the monks created conditions that would inhibit bacterial growth even after death. The meditation chamber itself was also scientifically significant. The cool, dry air of mountain caves, combined with limited oxygen circulation, created an environment similar to that used in modern freeze-drying processes. However, it's important to note that not all aspects of the process were scientifically sound. Many monks who attempted self-mummification failed, not because of lack of devotion, but because of variables they couldn't control. Seasonal weather patterns, the specific mineral content of local water, individual variations in body chemistry, and even genetic factors could all influence whether the preservation process would be successful. The practice of self-mummification didn't exist in isolation. It was part of a broader cultural context, where extreme asceticism was not only accepted, but often revered. In medieval Japan, the concept of mono no aware, the awareness of the impermanence of all things, permeated every aspect of society. Death was not seen as something to be feared or avoided, but as a natural transition, an opportunity for spiritual transformation. The successful self-mummified monks became powerful symbols within their communities. They were living proof, quite literally, that human will could triumph over physical limitation. Their preserved bodies served as focal points for worship, pilgrimage destinations, and sources of spiritual inspiration. Temples housing these mummified monks often became wealthy and influential. Pilgrims would travel from across Japan, bringing donations and offerings. The monks' preservation was seen as evidence of their continued spiritual presence and power. But the practice also generated significant controversy, even within Buddhist circles. Many mainstream Buddhist teachers argued that such extreme measures were unnecessary and potentially contrary to Buddhist principles. The Buddha himself had experimented with extreme asceticism early in his spiritual journey, nearly starving himself to death in pursuit of enlightenment. However, he ultimately rejected this approach, advocating instead for the middle way, a balanced approach that avoided both indulgence and extreme deprivation. Critics argued that self-mummification represented a return to the very practices that the Buddha had abandoned. They suggested that such extreme focus on the physical body, even in the service of transcending it, was actually a form of attachment, the very thing Buddhism sought to overcome. There were also practical concerns. The resources devoted to supporting a monk through years of self-mummification, the construction of special chambers, the constant care and monitoring required, could have been used to help many other people. Some Buddhist teachers worried that the dramatic nature of self-mummification would overshadow the more subtle but equally important aspects of Buddhist practice: meditation, compassion, wisdom, ethical conduct. These fundamental principles might be forgotten in favor of spectacular displays of physical endurance. The practice of self-mummification reached its peak during the 17th and 18th centuries. During this period, dozens of monks attempted the process, driven by a combination of religious fervor, social prestige, and genuine spiritual aspiration. However, by the late 19th century, attitudes toward the practice began to change dramatically. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 brought sweeping modernization to Japan, along with increased contact with Western ideas and values. Western observers, including Christian missionaries and secular scholars, were horrified by what they saw as barbaric self-torture. They couldn't understand how a supposedly enlightened religion could condone such extreme practices. More importantly, Japanese intellectuals and reformers, eager to modernize their country and gain acceptance in the international community, began to see self-mummification as an embarrassing relic of Japan's feudal past. In 1877, the Japanese government officially banned the practice of self-mummification. The law declared it a form of suicide, making it illegal for anyone to assist a monk in the process or to provide the facilities necessary for the practice. The ban was remarkably effective. Unlike many government prohibitions, which often drive practices underground, the outlawing of self-mummification seemed to bring an immediate end to the tradition. Several factors contributed to this sudden cessation. First, the practice required extensive community support. It wasn't something a monk could do entirely alone. The construction of meditation chambers, the preparation of special foods and medicines, the daily monitoring of the monk's condition, all required the cooperation of many people. When the government made such assistance illegal and threatened severe penalties for anyone involved, the support network necessary for self-mummification simply disappeared. Second, the practice had always depended on social approval and religious validation. Monks chose self-mummification partly because it brought honor to themselves, their temples, and their communities. When society's attitude shifted and the practice became seen as shameful rather than honorable, the motivation to attempt it largely disappeared. Finally, the rising influence of Western medicine and scientific understanding of human physiology made it increasingly difficult to maintain the religious beliefs that had supported the practice. As people learn more about nutrition, disease, and the actual processes of death and decay, the mystical explanations for successful self-mummification became less convincing. The last known attempt at self-mummification occurred in 1903, when a monk named Bukai began the process. However, he was discovered by authorities during the early stages and was forcibly prevented from continuing. Today, more than a century after the last attempt, how do we view the practice of self-mummification? What can it teach us about human nature, religious devotion, and the limits of physical and psychological endurance? From a medical perspective, self-mummification represents an extreme case study in human starvation and dehydration. Modern researchers have used historical accounts of the practice to better understand how the human body responds to prolonged malnutrition. The monk's ability to maintain consciousness and cognitive function, even in advanced stages of starvation, has provided insights into the brain's remarkable adaptability. Their use of meditation and mental discipline to cope with extreme physical distress has influenced modern research into pain management and psychological resilience. From an anthropological standpoint, self-mummification offers a window into a radically different worldview. In contemporary Western culture, where individual life is considered sacred and where medical intervention is used to preserve life at almost any cost, it's difficult to comprehend a mindset that would embrace such extreme self-destruction. Yet the monks who practiced self-mummification weren't mentally ill, nor were they acting impulsively. They were intelligent, educated individuals who had spent years preparing for their chosen path. They were supported by their communities, guided by centuries of religious tradition, and motivated by what they believed to be the highest possible spiritual goal. This raises profound questions about the nature of free will and informed consent. Can someone truly choose to undergo such extreme suffering? Or are they inevitably the product of their cultural conditioning, unable to see alternatives that might seem obvious to outsiders? Modern bioethics struggles with similar questions. We allow competent adults to refuse life-saving medical treatment, even if their decision seems irrational to others. We permit people to engage in dangerous activities, from extreme sports to voluntary military service, that carry significant risks of death or permanent injury. The practice of self-mummification forces us to confront the limits of personal autonomy. At what point does society have the right, or even the obligation, to intervene and prevent someone from harming themselves?
There's also the question of whether self-mummification achieved its stated goals.
Did the successfully preserved monks actually attain enlightenment? Or were they simply the victims of elaborate self-deception? From a purely secular perspective, the answer seems obvious. Death is death, regardless of how it's achieved. The preserved bodies in Japanese temples are remarkable artifacts, but they're not living Buddhas. Yet this secular view may miss something important. The practice of self-mummification, regardless of its ultimate spiritual validity, demonstrated an extraordinary level of human determination and self-control. These monks achieved something that most people would consider impossible, maintaining their resolve and mental clarity even as their bodies slowly died around them. Perhaps the true significance of self-mummification lies not in whether it achieved its religious objectives, but in what it reveals about the extraordinary potential of human consciousness. These monks demonstrated that the mind can indeed transcend physical limitations, at least to a degree that most of us would find incomprehensible. Today, 24 successfully self-mummified monks remain on display in temples across Japan. These preserved bodies serve as silent witnesses to one of humanity's most extreme spiritual experiments. The most famous of these is Shinyokai Shonin, whose perfectly preserved remains can be visited at Dainichibo Temple in Yamagata Prefecture. Seated in eternal meditation, his body shows no signs of decay, even after more than 2 centuries. Visitors often report being deeply moved by the sight of these mummified monks. There's something profoundly unsettling, yet strangely inspiring, about seeing a human being who chose to push the boundaries of mortality so far. The monks' faces, though obviously altered by the mummification process, often retain expressions of serene concentration. Their hands, still positioned in traditional meditation mudras, seem to continue their ancient practice. Some visitors report experiencing powerful spiritual emotions, a sense of being in the presence of something sacred. Others feel disturbed or horrified, unable to reconcile the peaceful appearance with the knowledge of the extreme suffering required to achieve it. Modern Japanese attitudes toward these preserved monks are complex and often contradictory. Many people view them as important cultural artifacts, representing a unique aspect of Japanese religious history. They're proud of the monks' extraordinary dedication, while simultaneously being thankful that such practices are no longer attempted. The temples that house these mummies have become significant tourist destinations. Thousands of visitors come each year, some seeking spiritual inspiration, others driven by curiosity about this bizarre chapter in human history. The monks themselves would likely have mixed feelings about this modern attention. On one hand, they sought to become objects of veneration, focal points for spiritual practice. In this sense, their goal has been achieved. On the other hand, much of the modern interest is purely secular, treating them more as curiosities than as sacred beings. Visitors take photographs, purchase souvenirs, and discuss the monk's appearance on social media. This commodification of extreme suffering raises its own ethical questions. Is it appropriate to display these bodies for public viewing? Are we honoring their sacrifice or exploiting it? Some scholars argue that the continued display of these mummies serves an important educational purpose. They remind us of the extraordinary lengths to which humans will go in pursuit of their deepest beliefs and values. They challenge our assumptions about what's possible and what's worthwhile. Others contend that the display is inherently disrespectful, reducing these monks to museum pieces divorced from their original religious context. They argue that true respect would require privacy, allowing these preserved beings to continue their meditation undisturbed by curious eyes. While the specific practice of self-mummification ended more than a century ago, its underlying impulses continue to manifest in various forms. The desire to transcend physical limitations, to achieve something beyond ordinary human experience, remains a powerful force in human psychology. In the world of extreme athletics, we see individuals pushing their bodies to seemingly impossible limits. Ultramarathon runners who cover hundreds of miles without rest, free solo climbers who scale vertical cliffs without safety equipment, deep-sea divers who descend to crushing depths, all share something with the self-mummifying monks. They're willing to risk everything, including their lives, in pursuit of experiences that most people would consider insane. Like the monks, they found meaning in the deliberate embrace of extreme physical challenge. In the realm of performance art, we see artists who subject themselves to prolonged physical ordeals as a form of creative expression. Marina Abramovich's The Artist is Present, where she sat motionless for 736 hours, facing museum visitors one by one, echoes the meditative endurance of the self-mummifying monks. Even in medicine, we see people making choices that prioritize spiritual or psychological goals over physical well-being. Patients who refuse life-extending treatments in favor of what they consider a more meaningful death are making calculations similar to those of the Japanese monks. The rise of extreme body modification, from extensive tattooing and piercing to more radical surgical alterations, reflects the same impulse to use physical transformation as a means of expressing identity and achieving psychological goals. Perhaps most significantly, the growing interest in meditation and mindfulness practices suggests that people are still seeking ways to transcend ordinary consciousness. While modern practitioners rarely embrace such extreme methods, they're pursuing the same fundamental goal, using mental discipline to achieve states of awareness that go beyond normal human experience. The technology industry has even produced its own version of extreme asceticism. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who fast for days, subject themselves to extreme cold exposure, or engage in other forms of deliberate discomfort, claim to be optimizing their mental and physical performance. While these modern practices rarely involve life-threatening risks, they reflect the same underlying belief that extraordinary achievements require extraordinary sacrifices. As we near the end of our exploration, we're left with fundamental questions that go to the heart of human existence. What does it mean to truly live? Is a life worth living if it's not directed towards some transcendent goal? The monks who practiced self-mummification believed that ordinary life, focused on mundane concerns like food, shelter, and comfort, was essentially meaningless. They saw their extreme practice not as a rejection of life, but as the ultimate affirmation of what life could become. By transcending their physical limitations, they believed they were achieving a form of existence that was more real and more valuable than anything available to ordinary mortals. Modern psychology recognizes that human beings have a fundamental need for meaning. People who lack a sense of purpose, who feel that their lives are insignificant, often suffer from depression, anxiety, and various forms of psychological distress. The self-mummifying monks, whatever we think of their methods, certainly didn't lack meaning in their lives. They had found something worth dying for, something that gave every moment of their existence, even their moments of extreme suffering, ultimate significance. This raises troubling questions about our own lives. In a world where traditional religious beliefs have lost their power for many people, where scientific materialism suggests that death is simply the end, where meaning must be created rather than discovered, how do we find reasons to keep living? The monk's practice also forces us to confront the relationship between suffering and spiritual growth. Almost all religious traditions, as well as many secular philosophies, suggest that some degree of hardship is necessary for human development. We grow stronger through adversity, more compassionate through our own pain, more wise through our mistakes and losses. But how much suffering is too much? At what point does hardship cease to be transformative and become simply destructive? The self-mummifying monks pushed this principle to its absolute extreme. They believed that the greatest possible suffering, willingly embraced and consciously endured, would produce the greatest possible spiritual transformation.
Were they right? Did their extreme sacrifice actually produce insights and states of consciousness that would have been impossible to achieve through gentler means? Or were they victims of a tragic delusion, mistaking self-torture for spiritual progress? We may never know for certain. What we can say is that these monks achieved something that most humans would consider impossible. They maintained their sanity, their sense of purpose, and their spiritual focus, even as they deliberately destroyed their own bodies. Whether this achievement was worthwhile, whether it revealed profound truths about the nature of existence, or whether it was simply an elaborate form of suicide, remains a matter of personal interpretation.
In the quiet temples of Japan, 24 preserved monks continue their eternal meditation. They sit in darkness and in light, through the changing seasons, through the rise and fall of civilizations, unchanged and unchanging. They have become what they sought to become, bridges between the mortal and the eternal, between the human and the divine. Whether their bridge actually leads anywhere, or whether it simply spans an empty void, is a question that each of us must answer for ourselves. Their story challenges our most basic assumptions about life and death, about suffering and transcendence, about what it means to be human. They remind us that consciousness, that strange, inexplicable phenomenon that allows us to experience existence, is capable of extraordinary things. In an age of instant gratification, where we seek to minimize discomfort and maximize pleasure, their example stands as a stark reminder of the power of absolute commitment. They chose to pursue their highest ideal, regardless of the cost. They refused to compromise, to settle for partial measures, to accept anything less than total transformation. Whether we admire them or find them disturbing, whether we see them as saints or madmen, we cannot deny their extraordinary dedication. They achieved immortality of a sort, not through their preserved bodies, but through their story, which continues to fascinate and horrify us, centuries after their deaths. In the end, perhaps that's the most profound lesson they offer. Not that we should follow their extreme example, but that we should examine our own lives and ask ourselves what we're willing to sacrifice for what we claim to value most. The monks who practiced self-mummification found something worth dying for. The question that remains for each of us is whether we can find something worth living for. And in the silence that follows that question, we might hear an echo of the bells that once rang in those sealed chambers, marking time until time itself stopped.